The first lecture, or rather your first lecture, not mine. So why do I feel so nervous? I suppose it has something to do with the artificial format. I am here, now. You are there, and then. Of course, consuming information via digital platforms is second nature to this generation of college students, pandemic or not. But that is also part of the pressure I feel. So many options. Should I aim for the slick, ubiquitous TED Talk, like an audio-visual spark notes designed to make you feel like an expert after 18 minutes? Or should I go for the you do you, breezy authenticity of YouTube influencers like Emma Chamberlain? Or perhaps the fast-paced, graphics-enhanced, and ever-expanding edutainment catalog of John and Hank Green's crash courses? As is probably already clear, I have selected none of the above, preferring the podium and the written word, outdated perhaps, though I prefer the terms vintage or old school. Now you may be wondering where the point is in all of this meta-reflection on lecture styles in the digital age, and moreover, what does this have to do with our common read, the purported topic of this first lecture? As one of my professors used to write in the margins of my paper, stop clearing your throat and get on with it. All right then, here is the point. When you peel back the digital veneer of TED Talks, crash courses, and YouTube influencers, and even the trendy obsession with vintage, what you discover, or what we already know but choose to ignore often, is just how much effort goes into producing the appearance of authenticity, of something normal and natural, the sense that what we are viewing is in fact the real. Yet Emma Chamberlain spends hours upon hours editing her videos to give the appearance of a normal day in her life. We are not simply observing her life, but taking a virtual tour through an intentionally curated exhibition of her life. Now, I want to suggest today that when we begin to acknowledge this dynamic, this logic at the heart of the digital age, that is when we are willing to acknowledge that so much of what we accept as real, normal, and authentic is actually the byproduct of editing, curating, and filtering. Then we place ourselves in a much better position to see more clearly the ways in which so much of what we have learned, or rather what has been taught, of, let's say, our history, has also been edited, filtered, and curated to produce a particular story of ourselves, a particular story of the United States, the very type of story that the spare prose of Julie Otsuka's devastating novel calls into question. Now, it may seem odd for a first lecture, but I am not going to say much more about this novel, When the Emperor Was Divine. That, of course, is your work to do in the coming weeks as part of your VUSM 100. Rather, what I want to do is show something of how my own encounter with this novel, or this text, as we like to say in academia, opens up ways of thinking about the myriad barriers that prevent us from fully participating in our shared life together. Barriers that I see at the heart of many of our most pressing issues today. That is, I want to show you something about how, when we take time to focus on one human story, it leads us to seek out other stories that demonstrate the practice of hearing one another into speech, as the activist Nell Morton suggested decades ago. A practice that we might call hospitality, radical hospitality even, a value, or better, a virtue, as the banners around campus suggest, that is at the core of our Viterbo identity. Hospitality, as Rick Kite, the director of our Ethics Institute, reminds us, is demanding because it requires that we welcome the whole person. Being civil to one another, being tolerant of one another, is, as we philosophers like to say, necessary, but not sufficient. What we need are words and habits of listening that bring us into deeper relationship with those who are different from us. What we need is radical hospitality practiced daily, not words and habits that merely let us tolerate one another in our differences. And when we practice hospitality, we discover the depths of human connectedness that we seem too often to ignore. The depths of human connectedness. A few years back, I had what might be described as a literal encounter with the depths of human connectedness. I found myself standing in absolute darkness. The only sound was the caught breath of 20 or so Viterbo students, the faint drip drop of water, and the reassuring voice of our guide. We were standing in one of the many caves that make up the Rising Star network of limestone caves in the region just northwest of Johannesburg, South Africa. Several months earlier, paleoanthropologists small enough to shimmy into the most unreachable parts of these caves had confirmed a startling discovery. Over 1,500 bones of what appeared to be a new relative of human beings. They called the new species Homo Naledi, a reference to the word star in the local Sotho-Tswana language. Now, what caught my attention in reports on this discovery, however, was the questions it raised about why the human species gathers together. You see, the researchers found these fossils well preserved and all together in a single, hard-to-reach chamber in a cave, suggesting that Homo Naledi were intentional in their practice of burying their dead. Standing there in the dark of that cave with my fellow Homo sapiens, letting the stories of our ancestors from 250,000 years ago fill our imagination, I would be hard-pressed to describe the experience in words that did not have religious resonance. Words like awe, gratitude, transcendence. And that very capacity we have as human beings to pause and reflect on our existence, to give voice or stand as silent witness to our deepest sense of being connected, to locate our individual story in the ever-deepening story of the universe. It is our capacity, in a word, to seek belonging. Think about that for a moment. For at least 250,000 years, human beings and our near ancestors have been asking, who am I? Who are my people? Am I part of something larger than myself? Do I belong? 250,000 years. It certainly puts into perspective our rather brief 250-year experiment, trying, failing, and trying again to answer those same questions here in the United States. In cultures throughout Southern Africa, this sense of belonging is fundamental to an understanding of human being. And it is captured by the saying, Umuntu, Ngumuntu, Gabantu. I am because we are. We are because I am. Not I am because the people who look like me or sound like me or follow me on TikTok are, but I am because we, all of us here, now, all who have gone before and all who will come after are. So permit me another story from South Africa, from an earlier trip with students, to illustrate the choice that I believe we are facing in the United States today. And if you are listening carefully to Atsuka's story, a choice that we quickly recognize as one that we have faced in various guises before. Our Viterbo students had a chance to go inside one of South Africa's prisons. And though a prison field trip was not on our itinerary, we jumped at the chance. After all, it was Mandela who said, "No one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones." Now, when we arrived, we were quickly ushered to a courtyard around which were 5 bunk rooms, the kind you might find at a summer camp. Each room housed about 15 prisoners, all of them young men between 18 and 25, all of them convicted of violent crimes. Each of these rooms, though, housed a team or a music group. There was the football, or rather soccer team, the basketball team, the rugby team, the prison choir, and the prison band. And when speaking with the young men, they told us of their nightly joys and concerns circles. They proudly showed us the covenants of accountability they had drafted together and displayed prominently on their wall. They talked of their teammates as family. For the young men in the Drakenstein Correctional Center, the team structure helped them make sense of life, largely, I suspect, because it offered an opportunity to belong, an opportunity that shared, importantly, a similar intensity as gang life had previously. The dynamics were not all that different on many levels. But one form of belonging, their team, their choir, was life-promoting, hopeful, generative, defined by relationships of mutuality, while the other, gang life, had traded almost exclusively in the language of violence, desperation, and nihilism. Life for these young men, the choices they made, had been defined before prison by their fear of being excluded, cast out, left to fend for themselves. And when driven by this fear, hospitality for others who are not part of your group is simply not possible. Indeed, it becomes a threat to your survival. But in prison, they experienced something different, a belonging built on the idea that when we are shown hospitality and when we offer it to others, we become different persons. When we experience deep connection with those who come from different backgrounds or who hold different beliefs, we ourselves become more fully human, more able to see ourselves as contributing positively to the larger human story. I am because we are. We are because I am. Now, I left out an important part of the story, a description of the other side of the prison. That cell block with the teams in the choir was not the only one. The other side housed over 500 inmates in a space designed for half that number. The wardens ushered us past it very quickly when we first arrived, telling us that it was unsafe and that they had given up trying to control it. It was overcrowded, violent, and defined by the various gangs who were fighting the very same turf wars that they had been fighting outside of prison. In such conditions, empathy and hospitality for others was a risk. Empathy and hospitality for others who are not a part of your group had become a threat to their survival. Now, inmates on both sides of this prison had similar histories of violence against them, of violence they had committed. But on one side, they had found a way to I am because we are, while on the other side, their only option was I am because you are not. I am only when you have been silenced, shouted down, erased. These two images of the prison in South Africa suggest that we do have a choice. We can choose to create the conditions in our society that make hospitality and empathy possible, or we can choose to recreate the same conditions that make fear and violence probable. And perhaps you're beginning to suspect that there may be another point to this story, a point that is not really about prisons in South Africa, about doing prison better, but about doing democracy better here in our country. A point that Atsuka's novel drives home powerfully without ever naming it explicitly out loud. We too have a choice to create the conditions, the ways of speaking to one another, ways of being that begin not with I am because you are not, but I am because you are, because we are. Umuntu, Gabuntu, Ngabantu. Now, both of these stories suggest that learning is often about unlearning, or at minimum, suspending your previous learning long enough to consider a new perspective, to open yourself to disruption. The cave experience and the adjacent Cradle of Humankind museum we visited were an unlearning of the stereotypes and stories we tell about Africa and its peoples. The prison, an unlearning of the conclusions we have come to about what a criminal justice system should look like. The Umuntu, an unlearning of the Western primacy, I think, therefore I am. Up till now, these have been telling faraway stories, stories from across the globe and stories that reach far back in time. But of course, empathy does not begin far away, but near. We learn what hospitality is when reaching out to persons near to us, persons we pass by every day, persons who share the school halls and cafeteria tables with us. In that sense, When the Emperor Was Divine feels very much to me like a near story and a now story, despite its depiction of a time that is distant, often confined to our historical imagination. It is a story that bears witness to a past we would rather forget, a tragic exhibition best left in storage rather than displayed prominently in our carefully curated museum of "We hold these truths to be self-evident." It is a story like so many being told in the streets today that remind us that we can do this better. We can do this democracy thing better. We can do this human thing better. And here is how it starts. Umuntu, Gomuntu, Gabantu. I am because we are. We are because I am. In VUSM 100, you will confront together the painful story of Japanese American life in the 1940s and the invitation, or rather the demand, to re-examine the truths that have been so carefully curated for us about our history in the land of the free and the home of the brave. It is a demand I cannot ignore when reading Atsuka's description of the new normal experienced by Japanese American families returning to their old neighborhoods after the war. She writes, "At school, our new teachers were kind to us, and the students in our classes polite, but at lunchtime they would not sit with us or invite us to join in the games. And not a single one of our old friends came up to us to say, 'Welcome back,' or 'Good to see you,' or even seemed to remember who we were. One day we were there, and the next day, poof, our names had been crossed off the roll books, our desks and lockers reassigned, we were gone. And so we mostly kept to ourselves. Always we were polite. And when our teachers asked us if everything was all right, we nodded our heads and said, 'Yes, of course, everything was fine.' To ask questions of the curated truths that appear to us as normal, as natural, to nod our heads and say, 'Yes, everything was fine.' To challenge the truths that give us narrow definitions of the we and we the people. One day we were there, and the next day, poof, we were gone. To call these truths into question is to resist the complacency and complicity that makes it possible, even desirable, to set and see the reality as presented to us as normal, as natural, as the only reality that exists. We might be tempted to characterize the passage I just read from Atsuka as the new normal. But in so doing, we make the new normal into a euphemism, a phrase that masks the underlying violence and erasure experienced by the family upon their return home. Instead, this passage challenges us to pursue with courage the truths that arise not from passive acceptance, but from critical, creative, constructive engagement with an imperfect world. And if we accept this challenge, perhaps we will learn and unlearn together what is required of us as full participants in this country's ongoing project of creating a more perfect union. A project that, at least in my most hopeful moments, reaffirms our shared commitments to hospitality in the face of hostility and reinforces the threads that bind us together in the face of the threats that tear us apart.
Hello, and welcome to Viterbo University, the home of your future alma mater. I am Melissa Collum with the Core Curriculum Department, and I am so excited to be a part of this year's First Year Seminars lectures. So when I got the call to be a first lecturer, I thought, why? Why me? Why do I get to speak to you? And what I found out was that the seniors, the graduating seniors, nominate professors to be a part of this lecture series. And I thought, wow, that's like so awesome. My students love what I'm teaching them. They're going to be lifelong learners and all that kind of stuff. And then I called them, a few of them up, and I asked, why did you nominate me? And they said, we love your stories. We love how you link what you've done and to what we are doing today. And so that's what I'm going to do for you today. I'm going to link my unique life history, my unique life experiences, and your future here at Viterbo University. So you might be thinking, what makes her so unique? Why does she get to talk about this? Well, for some of you, we've had the same life path. I was born in a very poverty situation to a single mom. I grew up in a one-room log cabin with no electricity until fourth grade, and no running water until I was at university in my sophomore year. I am a first-generation American on my father's side. I am Hispanic, and even though I teach at a Catholic university, I'm Jewish, which, yay, awesome, diversity. But that puts me in a unique opportunity to be first generation, to meet with you on different levels. But beyond my life experience, my lived experience, it's also what I've done as a professional. I work with the United Nations and with other non-governmental organizations traveling the world doing educational evaluation. My specialty area is Central and East Africa and Asia, and I also work in the Middle East. You're like, wow, cool, I want to grow up and I want to do that. But it's not about what I do. It's about who I am, and it's about who you are and the opportunities that you are going to take part in here at Viterbo University. I've had the opportunity to travel around the world, working in different schools and different experiences. And when I take those opportunities, I often spend time with young people. And I ask them the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? This young lady is very unique in the fact that she is from the Tharu community in rural Nepal. The Tharo people are an ethnic minority that is targeted by the government, and most times they do not get to go to school at all. So this young lady's response is extraordinary.
What would you like to be when you grow up?
तपाईँ पढेर ठुलो भइसकेपछि के बन्ने? टिचर.
She wants to be a teacher. And what you know from taking the chance to be an educator, we're all educators in one way or another, but to grow up in an ethnic minority and to stand in front of students and to be that exemplar to her students is a laudable goal. Yes, she may only be in the second grade, but she already knows what she wants to become. So, when we look at our lived experiences, our background, the people who shape us, who mentor us, and who guide us, that all determines whom we've yet to become. It shapes us. Now that you're here at university, some people might be afraid that we're going to put undue influence on you, that we're going to radicalize you or put forth ideas that are going to warp your thinking. We're not. We're going to challenge you. We're going to cause you to look at those things that came before and how do they shape you now. If you look at the images in these pictures, of course I've got my daughter and my grandchildren, and I have my adoptive parents. That's a whole nother story in and of itself. But I also have people that mentor me. I'm still in contact with people that I've worked with overseas. And my mentor from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who shaped my being able to do the international work that I do. But they all shape who I become. They help me to ask the question. So when I started teaching, I had the amazing opportunity of teaching in Kenya. I got to do my student teaching there. And so I went overseas all bright-eyed and did my student teaching and was ready to return home. And my school, Chebisos Boys School in Eldoret, said, "Would you like to stay on and become faculty?" And I was like, yes, opportunity and a job, way cool, right? So I called my university, which way back when that was a huge thing to get an overseas call, so that tells you how old I am. So I called my university and I said, look, I got a job, can you send me my diploma? And the School of Education said, no, you need to come back and you need to do your second placement of student teaching in a middle school here in the States in order for us to grant you your diploma and your teaching license. And I was like, okay, fine, I'm staying. And so I remained and taught in Kenya, but then when I finally came back, I still had to do that student teaching placement at a middle school, and part of that process was a course that we took and we got our resumes ready and things like that, and we had to write our philosophy of education to go on our resume. And needless to say, I've always been a little bit of a rule bender, and so I thought, you know, so many other people write so many great things. I can't pen something that sums up who I am. So I borrowed, stole, I guess, from Mark Twain. And my philosophy of education and variations thereof since then has been, my goal in life is to combine my advocation and my vocation till my two eyes become one in sight. Mark Twain. So what does that mean in this process of where you are as incoming underclassmen sitting in a first lecture? How does this relate to you? It's about taking what you're being trained to do and using those skills to better the lives of others. The two pictures that I have up here are very influential. The one in the bottom corner is me with a woman by the name of Seraphine, and she is a genocide survivor in Rwanda. I found that in my skills as a historian, I was a social studies teacher, that I knew how to take oral histories. And so when I was working in Rwanda, I happened upon the opportunity to start taking oral histories, genocide narratives of women and children, mostly. And that has become a lifelong pursuit. I have taken narratives all over the world with all different kinds of people. Not good on me, but here is a skill that I learned at university, and now I am taking that skill and I'm applying it to something even greater. The picture in the upper corner is a refugee camp on the border of South Sudan. And oftentimes in my work with the United Nations, I go into UN camps and I look at the state of the children. One of the things that we know is that the more normalcy that children can have in their lives in trying times, the better off they are in order to succeed. And so one of the things in UN camps that we try to do is we try to have some type of school going on. The camps that I have been walked into are heartbreaking. They are a place where humanity goes to get help. And it's humbling to me to know that my university path, my undergraduate and graduate education, and my life here at Viterbo as a Viterbo faculty member shapes my ability to go into places like this and to do the job that I need to do. So thinking about my philosophy of education and how it shapes my life is about thinking about how I have those skills that I was taught to do for that job, that what I want to be, and how I shape that to the humanitarian that I'm trying to become. When we look at the book When the Emperor Was Divine, there's so many questions about character and development that we need to ask. So many things about the people in this book and the circumstances around them. I want you to think about who they were before this incident happened? How did this incident shape them to what they became? How did this experience alter who they were? And I want you to think about, did anyone during this time that they were incarcerated or afterwards ask them what they want to become? Or were they just in a state of being? Your time here at Viterbo, your 4 years is going to go by so quickly. It's going to be amazing how fast it goes through. But I want you to remember this day that you're sitting listening to these professors in this first lecture, asking you all of these different questions about your humanity, your ideas of empathy and understanding. They go by fast. I don't know how many graduations that I've been to, but every student is unique. Every student you remember in some way or another, and they touch your lives. Here at Viterbo, you have an opportunity to go beyond just a job, to take what we're giving you and forge it into whom you want to become. Throughout your 4 years here, you are going to have to take 4 mission seminars, and you're like, ugh, no, religion classes, please, not that. But really, they aren't. There are 4 courses that help us to bring to you our Viterbo mission, our understanding of contemplation, hospitality, integrity, servant leadership or service, and stewardship. How do we bring those to you, and how do you bring them forward in your life? I have these pictures up here because they're reflective of students that I've worked with and things that I've had the opportunity to do here at Viterbo. When I travel overseas, it's really great because I normally have the opportunity to take students with me. The student on the top, her name is Brooke. She is one of our nursing graduates. She traveled with me to Kenya to do health evaluations on rural schools. Brooke then took a position at a hospital in Colorado, and because she was so dedicated to service, she wrote a grant, and her hospital is now paying for her to be in India for a year, studying holistic medicine and bringing that understanding back to the wards that she works in Colorado. So she is in India right now. The other nurse that you see, that's Haley. Haley now has a position at the Cleveland Clinic. Haley was with me in Nepal, and when we were in Nepal, she identified a young student that had measles at our school. We then traced it down, and Haley actually was able to identify a measles cluster in the community that we had. We then had to notify the authorities, and Haley was able to help avert a measles outbreak in a rural community in Nepal. She has shaped the lives of hundreds and thousands of children in rural in rural Nepal. The student that I'm sitting with, her name is Julie, and she is a special education educator. She was a history major and education major here at Viterbo, and she was the first student with the National Council for the Social Studies to be the student representative for the National House of Delegates, the voting arm of the National Council for Social Studies. So she was the voice for all pre-service educators in the United States of America for 2 years. And she is a Viterbo graduate. The bottom 2 pictures I showed you because of the VUSM 300 class, which is our class on servant leadership. Now, the 2 students on the bottom with the nursing club t-shirts on are participating in a bone marrow registration drive that one of my courses did. And we registered about 120 people in the Viterbo community and the greater community. And the really cool thing about that is that I know of 3 people from that drive that have donated bone marrow, which is pretty cool. when we think about how far our reach here at Viterbo goes. And at the bottom, this is one of our international students, and every spring we host a Days for Girls sew-in here at Viterbo. And what Days for Girls is, if you're not familiar, it's an organization that sews reusable menstrual hygiene products, and we deliver them to developing nations. And we have done this for a couple of years now. And in that process, we have been able to produce about 800 packets that have gone to developing nations so that women don't have to use things like rags or mud or things like that for menstrual hygiene. And so the impact that you can have here while you're at Viterbo goes beyond the profession that you are going to become. And so I've got one more story to share with you. And this story is about how we shape our identity, how we think about our role in the world. This is a young boy who lives in the slums outside of Kigali, Rwanda, and he is the youngest in his family. He has two older sisters, both of which are going to school. And so if you know anything about Rwandan society, it is the youngest girl who takes over the domestic chores, the water carrying, the cooking, the cleaning, and all of that for her family as her family ages. And this young man, even though he was still in primary school, understood the value of an education. And oftentimes, just like in the United States, when we ask little people, what do you want to be when you grow up? They'll say a footballer or a model or a dancer or a movie star. But what this young man said was absolutely amazing.
What would you like to be when you grow up?
Ese uretse kuzaba wenda umukinnyi wa football umaze gukura n'icyumva uzakora kindi umaze gukura. When I will grow up, I will go to fetch water. Ikindi nta kandi kazi uzakora umaze kuba mukuru. No, just fetching water.
It's good.
What does this mean, that he wants to carry water? It means that he is going to take over the domestic responsibilities for his family, that he is going to be the one that day in, day out carries water for cooking, for cleaning, for washing. It is a lifetime task. Normally, the child who carries water for the family, which is kind of a euphemism for doing all of that unpaid labor, is the one who does not go to school, who does not get married, who stays with the family for the rest of their lives, with their parents for the rest of their lives, and cares for them. That was what he was choosing to do. The content of his character is amazing. So when you're thinking back to your time here at Viterbo and this first lecture and all of your lived experience that you're bringing to us, is it really about what you want to be, that job that you're going to get? Or is it how you're going to take this Viterbo experience and ask yourself, whom am I going to become?